Uh, Good afternoon. I just take this chance to thank Eda, Diana, Edmund, and I know Ghazi, another name, the taxi driver who picked us. And I know there are other people who made this conference possible. Thank you very much. I will be talking about the endangered languages of Pamir, and look at the case of the speakers of the Pamiri languages in Moscow, Russia. So just to give a background of the community, Pamir itself, you probably know, is a mountain range at the heart of Central Asia. It is known as a roof of the world. Some scholars associate it with the origins of the, like the land of the Aryans where they originated. It takes about 44% of the territory of Tajikistan, and also known as the Gorno-Badakhshan Autonomous Region. The people in that mountain region known as the Pamirian, and they sort of bear the marks of the ancient nations who at one point inhabited the vast region of Central Asia, like including Sogdians, Scythians, Bactrians, and other nations. It's also, you may know that Central Asia was a crossroad of various civilizations. It was one of the road of the Silk Road passed through the Pamirs. So all these ancient nations, they left their marks on the people of Central Asia. Currently, the population is around 200,000, and the inhabitants of the Pamirs, they identify themselves as Pamirians or Badakhshanis, and also with their religious identity as Ismaili Muslims. So first, this map, what you see is just a map of Tajikistan, and also this whole area, it is a recent development. It emerged about 150 years ago as a result of the British and Russian rivalry in the area where they divided the region, their spheres of influence, and that's how these borders emerged. So the Pamiri people, they live in the, you can't see the names of the valleys, but they are Shoghni, Rushani, Wahi. So they were identified according to their lands. But the word Pamiris is a recent development. For the Shoghni or the Tajik themselves, the Pamir refers to the highlands in the right side. You can see it's a land which is no survival means. But as Russians moved to the area, they decided to divide it into two parts, eastern and western Pamirs, and gradually the speakers of that region, like Shoghni, some of these endangered languages, they also started to be associated as Pamiris. So there are around 10 languages and dialects spoken in these areas. Some scholars classify them as Shoghni, Rushani because of their comprehensibility and people understand. But some of the languages, for example, I'm a speaker of Shoghni language, but I don't understand Wahi language, which is spoken in the same area, or Ishkashimi area. So it's a very diverse region. And also the language has no official status. It is the Tajikistan also recognized these languages as a sort of ancient, distinctive languages of the Tajiks, but there is no means to promote these languages in Tajikistan, in the Pamir area. So let me move to the main topic is the migration processes in the Pamir. As I mentioned, initially the Pamir was a land which attracted migrants. There was an inward migration which sort of continued for centuries, where people from other parts, they took refuge in these mountain areas due to war, different issues they faced in the valleys. So, but from end of 19th century, especially during the Afghan invasion of Badakhshan, there's a lot of people from this Pamir region. They migrated to China, to some of them to northern Pakistan, to other areas of Central Asia. And later on, when the Russian took over, there was some stability for a few centuries, for a few years. But then we see another wave of migration, is the labor migration, which started to other parts of Central Asia in early 20th century. During Soviet time, people from the Pamir region also migrated to other parts of Tajikistan and gradually to beyond Tajikistan to other parts of Soviet Union. But the real migration from the Pamir region started during the civil war in Tajikistan in 1991. Civil war, you know, the consequences of war, what it can be. So we see the first wave of migration from Tajikistan, especially from the Pamir region, during the period of civil war. But the number of Pamiris at the time were not many, those who migrated to Russia. There was about 300 to 500 people. But in the second wave of migration, which started after the civil war, due to the economic hardship, we see now more people are sort of migrating or traveling to Russia, and most of them were labor migrants. So they went for seasonal jobs for 1 year or 2 years and usually return back. But since 2010 mostly, when people move from Tajikistan to Russia, especially to Moscow, most of them tend to stay there and settle in Russia. So we have about 2 million Tajiks in Russia today. For the country which has less than 10 million population, it's almost 1/5 of its population now outside of the country. And among those, around 40,000 are speakers of the Pamira languages, and most of them are concentrated in Moscow and other large cities in Russia, like St. Petersburg, Ekaterinburg, Vladivostok, and so on. So how these communities now survive and preserve their identity? First, it's important, I think in today's talk earlier, was also indicating how important is these cultural and social factors in defining the diaspora. People who come from the Pamir area, they come as a kaum, which means clan or avlod, and other terms like hamsoya, neighbor, or hamqishlok, people of the same village. But these terms, they are more sort of contain a deeper meaning than just a neighbor or clan. Living in the mountain areas for centuries, these people develop a strong sense of dependence on each other. So if we say neighbor in UK would mean different to saying neighbor in Tajikistan, because you sort of, there is a sense of obligation to your neighbor, to your relative, to your community member, and you feel like you're obliged to help them. So this sense and these values have been transferred when people moved from Pamir to Russia, and it helped people to bring their families, their neighbors, their people of the same village to Russia and settle. So the community was reorganized along the village, district, and regional background initially. So even people, let's say, who come from a certain village in Wakhan or in Rushan, they would form a very close unit community, and they try to support each other and also bring people. It became a process of attracting and bringing people from the homeland and help them to settle in Moscow. That was initial, but in 1999, members of this diverse community decided to organize another organization known as NUR, which means light, which is a regional public organization for the promotion of the identity, languages, and cultural practices of the people of Tajikistan. So it's interesting that they call it Tajikistan, but actually they are very different from rest of the Tajik in terms of the language. They identify themselves as Pamirian, people who come from the Pamir region. Some of the objectives of this organization, which sort of serves as a hub for the community to interact in their own languages, although the promotion of the Pamiri language is not the primary objective of this organization, but through their activities, they enable the community to come together. And of course, that communication is usually take place in native language. So their primary objective is to promote religious education. And as Pamirians, they belong to the Ismaili branch of Shia Islam, and educating them, providing educational material which are produced at the Institute of Ismaili Studies in London and translated to Russian and other languages. That's one of the primary objectives of this organization. They organize cultural events like concerts, other festivals. They organize sports, and they have different committees which oversees these different activities, like committee for young people, committee for education, committee for sport, etc. So even if those the language doesn't fall exactly under the remit of this organization, the informal gathering which are happening in NUR, they involve the communication in native language. And the community, through that network and the framework which they are provided, they keep asking questions about how to preserve their culture, how to preserve their identity or their language in Russian Federation. So that's how they have different camps and different events which are ongoing, and they have their own website and networks, and it's enabled them to keep together. And this NUR actually counted the number of Pamiri in Moscow, which is about 8,000. Now, in what ways the language is promoted? As I said, it is indirectly promoted, but there is still a strong sense of the language as the most conspicuous link with homeland, with the values and traditions which exist, and their communications in families still even in Russia, because we still have the first generations who come from the Pamirs. Also, the second generation is growing up, but those are the families, the parents who bring their children to the NUR organization, for example. Their main concern is how to enable their children to understand, to learn about their own culture, their own religion and tradition. So social media has become a very important means to discuss or debate the importance of language. And that refers also to the Pamiri community in Russia. Many people, when you observe that communication, there is a clear indication of urgency which families feels about the preservation of their mother tongue. And there are, of course, people who question what's the point of learning our language in the context where they're not going to use it. What's the benefit of that? But the fact that this debate is going on is indicate that there is a chance or there's opportunity and the growing understanding of importance of maintaining or preserving their language as important indicator of not just a mark of their identity or their language, but also important factor in preservation of their religious identity. Interestingly, we observe a lot of Pamiri now. They feel very comfortable to write poetry or prose in their own mother tongue on social media and expressing their feelings, the challenges which they face in Moscow. So that's the last slide. There are some prospects for survival of the Pamiri languages in Moscow. First of all, there is inherent vitality. There is what I mentioned about this family strong sense of dependence from members of the same community, that the values which they bring from the Pamir area, where they feel that they are obliged to help their neighbor, they're obliged to help their countrymen. And we notice it from time to time. If there is a small clashes in the Pamirs, next day you will see thousands of Pamiri coming in front of the embassy and expressing their concerns of what's happening there. So even if they are sort of speak different languages, they still maintain that sense of belonging to the Pamir, to that area, and they are very sort of feel that sense of responsibility. There is the domains of use of the language continues in the family. People try to teach their children their mother tongue. The documentation of the language is another factor, because the Russians has done a tremendous job in documenting Pamiri languages. A lot of dictionary textbooks were produced in the last 100 years or so. And another fact is the number of speakers. Like 100 years ago, the Pamiri and the Russian conquered the area. They estimated their number to be around 10 to 15,000. And during the Soviet period, that number increased to 200,000. And that even we notice it today in Moscow, where from 300 people from the Pamir 20 years ago, now we have about 40,000. That is one of the factors which can help the community to maintain their identity. There is one important aspect is cultural revitalization, which started with the collapse of the Soviet Union in Tajikistan among the Pamiri people. And it continues till today, even in countries like Russia. I particularly want to emphasize the Pamiri singer Ledush Habib. He was the first he was a singer bard, you know, the singer who started singing in native language using the guitar, and it was so attracting that it started a new movement in creating poetry and singing it in native language. So in Moscow, almost annually, they have this Ledush Saroi, they call it. It is the performance of songs in memory of Ledush, but it also helps the community to encourage, especially the younger generation, to write poetry and sing them in native language. And that, I think, is an important factor. The most important factor that indicates how one individual can make a great change in the revitalization of cultural revitalization and maintenance of the native language. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you very much.